Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you on this last day of the European Remembrance Symposium in Brussels. My name is Małgosia Wosińska and I am a Holocaust and Genocide Study researcher and psychotraumatologist from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Poland. And today I have an honor to moderate our discussion on reconciliation and overcoming the burden of violence. And we have already 2 very interesting days, and thank you very much for European Network on Remembrance and Solidarity for inviting such interesting guests. And today we have also special guests on the cell, and Mr. Jan Figel, who is a European Commissioner, first Special Envoy for promotion of freedom of religion and of belief. And I would be very happy if we can introduce him and give him a space, give him a floor to show and present us the new policy of memory in the European Parliament. And after that, we'll start with our panel.
Thank you very much, Małgorzata. Thank you, Rafał Rogulski, and you all for giving me not only opportunity, but also for being here as a community of those who keep memory and also responsibility for what happened in order to have or to build, to promote different, better, more human century. I came here as special envoy for freedom of religion or belief outside of the European Union, which is really the first ever position within the 60 years old European Union. I think it's very important that we do for non-material quality of life or perspectives where freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom to believe or not to believe, freedom of conviction is respected as human dignity, as essential value. I think this was a lot abandoned, neglected, or embittered human right in the previous century, which you call in your symposium century of violence. I would add even more that because we forgot to respect human dignity, this was even deeper loss of humanity, or it was century of genocides. Situation in the world today is not easy, and especially this human right, this right to freedom of religion or belief, is disrespected significantly in 40% of states of today's world. They represent 3/4 of global population. So majority of people today in the world does not enjoy full right to freedom of conscience. And tendency, the trend, is even more negative, which means status is negative and tendency is even worse. And the levels of oppression are intolerance, discrimination, persecution, and even genocide. Today, it's not theory, it's reality today. Especially on the territories dominated still by ISIS, so-called Islamic State. There is a genocide according to European Parliament, Council of Europe, many other parliaments or institutions of the world. Why I mention it? Because my role, my position was invoked, initiated by the parliamentary resolution in February last year. In last year, German Bundestag adopted a resolution on Armenian killing in 1915-1916, 100 years after, that it was a genocide. There was not only Armenian killing, but Holocaust, then Lebanon, Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, many periods of liquidation, total liquidation of the others. Therefore, I think that your work as network, as national institutes of memory, as citizens of Europe, of this world, is so important for all of us, because where remembrance prevails, there is also clear identity, clear humanity in responsiveness to the others. And where remembrance is present, there is also respect, and where is respect, there is gratitude for the gifts of freedom, rule of law, democracy, common Europe. And if remembrance, memory, is weak or lost, then we see other tendencies to grow. I think that what was dominant in the century of genocides was ideology of superiority in combination with hatred and violence, different sorts of superiority, Übermensch, or even now that according Caliphate or ISIS, the Muslims are more than the others, which is false, utopian, militant ideology. We need to stop it. And these ideologies, they had always very influential allies: indifference, ignorance, and fear. And the work of education, institutions, democratic institutions, should help to eliminate or to fight against allies of ideologies, against indifference, ignorance, and fear. Therefore, we need more responsibility, courage, sense of togetherness, ethics of solidarity. I want to praise once again not only your symposium, but European Network of Remembrance and Solidarity. I want to also praise the work of Slovak Institute for Nations Memory, and especially its president, Ondrej Krajniak. I wish you not only a very successful symposium, but a lot of success outside of this symposia, with people, with institutions, with educators, because we need to start and to build different century. We failed in the previous century on 3 P's or fronts which were our promise. Never again. It was promised to prevent, to protect, and to punish. We have been weak in preventing genocides. We have been weak in protecting victims, and we had been weak also in bringing justice, to punish criminals. And if we learn and learn together, I'm sure we can build different, better, more human century. I wish so. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much for all your support and for good words. It's very important for us to stay together. I want to believe that our today's meeting, our today's panel brings some hope into our discussion on the experience of violence. I'm using the word hope, and yesterday in European Parliament, in the closing remark of debate, Dr. Piotr Szywiński, the director of Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, he also used the word hope. And I'm not influenced by him. I was thinking about the concept of hope before. But I am very glad that this word show up somehow in our discussion. I hope it's really important. And I'm using the word hope because both terms, reconciliation and overcoming, are connected with activity which takes place on legal, symbolic, and intellectual level, with doing something to make a change, we think, for better, I hope for better, with activity performed both by groups and individuals. From the psychotraumatological point of view, experienced trauma and violence can be overcome only when it's named, when we are giving a name, when we are framing it, when a certain discourse is created, and, in consequence, one has the opportunity to go through the state of mourning. When I was conducting my field research in the countries which were suffering mass violence, atrocity, and genocide in Europe and beyond Europe, I was working in Rwanda, in DRC for the tribunal, I came to understand that the need to name, to give a name, to create a discourse for violent experience is a need to all people have in common. However, not all discourses concerning past experience of violence are equally justified. Not all are pluralistic enough. Some violent events, especially those from the second half of the 20th century, are known to us only to extent to which the media discourse allowed so. This type of discourse, international discourse, media discourse, plays an important role, informative role for European community, for us, but in the same time very often is driven by conventional, misleading knowledge, phantasmatic knowledge, and somehow it's covered local discourses and expert knowledge. Because of the above, talking about violence that occurred in the 20th century does not release us from the obligation to apply extensive critical cognitive perspective. We have to keep on uncovering the history of violence with a fresh and active attitude in order to give a voice to smaller discourses, some discourses which somehow lost in the past. Let me give you an example, thanks to effort undertaken by the Witold Pilecki Center for Totalitarian Studies. The representatives of this institution are today with us, and yesterday were running workshops in the European Parliament. So thanks to these institutions, in 2016, we could return to case of Heinz Reinfarth and discuss it in the presence of lawyers from different countries. Reinfarth was a German soldier, a member of SS, and a person responsible for the massacre of Wola, a district of Warsaw, in 1944. The Wola massacre is considered the biggest war crime against civilians, war crimes, to take place during the World War II. It's also a crime that almost nobody, has been held accountable for until today. Also due to the fact that after the war, Reinfarth was a respected citizen, the mayor of beautiful town, Westerland in Germany, and a lawyer, and he died in 1979, more or less in peace. I am sure that each of you knows similar cases which happen in your own country. Cases which for a long time were left unnamed or remain unsolved until today. And here is somehow my first question or first teaser for our debate. Do we need, in active way, to confront with the past? Do we need to give a name to discourses? Or maybe overcoming and reconciliation is possible without giving a direct name? Yes. Secondly, the active approach to the past is important not only because we have to give a name and confront with a difficult experience, but also the active approach to the history is important and is necessary because we have to understand how different strategies are of dealing with difficult past, how different in particular countries in European Union are overcoming and reconciliation, how different the strategies are. And I truly believe that getting familiar with this diversity, what does it mean in Bosnia, yes, what does it mean in Spain, overcoming a reconciliation, that understanding of this diversity helps us to building a more aware European identity, aware also of a sensitivity of the language and discourse its use. In a moment, we will hear country statements presented by outstanding experts in the field of difficult history and memory. They will elaborate on overcoming and reconciliation in the context of represented countries, but also in the light of their intellectual tradition and practical activities undertaken with their local communities, because you are very grounded. You have your institutions, and you are really with the local community. It was also very important. In order to make our discussion a bit more challenging, I would like to present the second question and the second thesis. So my thesis is, we cannot close past violence experience in museum on archives, even we would like to do it, because such experiences have a tendency to reappear and repeat themselves. By becoming active and reflecting on the past from the active perspective, we should remain alert to contemporary conflicts and events. I consider this type of responsibility to be active towards history but thinking about the present as a key for the European identity, which emphasizes the meaning of democratic values and the necessity to protect human rights. And now the research question, our Brussels Symposium, titled Violence in the 20th Century European History, Commemorating, Documenting, Educating. Question, are the violence we are talking about and the processes of overcoming a reconciliation connected with it are only European issue, or maybe somehow, somewhere they are also non-European issue? Ladies and gentlemen, after this a bit too long introduction, I would like to welcome our speakers today, Professor Valérie Rozoux, and she is a philosopher and expert in international relations, and her research interests focus on transitional justice, post-war reconciliation, Franco-German case, for example, but also Algerian, and she used and the uses of memory in international relations. Then we have Professor Jordi Guichet, who is sitting here on my left, a historian and a founder-director of the European Observatory on Memories at the University of Barcelona Solidarities Foundation. He is an associate professor at Art Faculty at the same university, where he teaches about the memory in public space. And then we have Dr. Nicola Moll, who is a historian who was born in Brussels, but he moved to Sarajevo, and he's living in Sarajevo since 2007. He's an independent researcher and a trainer in the fields of intercultural cooperation, dealing with the past and civil society development. He is also a coordinator of the Memory Lab, also institutional, which is working in the field, let's say. Each of the speakers have around 15 minutes of their presentation. After that, we will make a discussion. We will see maybe just a one question, one round between us. And then, of course, I am open for Q&A, because I am very curious about your question and reaction to different understanding of overcoming and reconciliation. Professor Vareliu, would you like to start? Okay.
Thank you very much, and Malgosia. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for giving me the opportunity to be here to discuss with you today. So this is a privilege and a pleasure. And my talk will be a talk, let's see. My small talk will be divided into three main points, and each of them could be summarized by a dichotomy that is usually taken for granted, and that I would like to question with you. The first one concerns timing, and it concerns the dichotomy between past and present. My second point will deal with the importance of representations and the dichotomy between enemy and friend. And the third point will question the role of emotions and the dichotomy between positive and negative emotions, right? So this is a bit the idea. And at each stage, I will try to favor a reflective perspective regarding the scope and limits of our own role as scholars and or practitioners. So let's start with the timing and the distinction between past and present. Timing, yes. So reconciliation is often defined as a transformative process, and I would like to emphasize the duration of any transformative process in the aftermath of mass atrocities. So my idea is more than it becomes something like that after a war. Changes of representations, beliefs, and emotions take time. And all case studies show that these changes do not take years, they take generations, right? I like this caricature that some of you already know, but I think it might be useful and very rapid to transmit a message. This caricature had been made by Plantu in the newspaper, the French newspaper Le Monde, right? And you see a battlefield. It was in Croatia during the 90s. What do we see? A soldier taking revenge for his brother-in-law killed in 1918. And then you see this soldier taking revenge for his little cousin raped in 1944. And this baby thinking to take revenge for his father in 2023. Right? And so my question is not theoretical at all, even though by training I'm a philosopher, really it is so concrete. Victor Hugo once wrote, "The dead are invisible, but they are not absent. Les morts sont les invisibles, ils ne sont pas les absents." And if we take this perspective into consideration, if we take that seriously, it questions the distinction between the past and the present. And I would like just to show you, sometimes I go to Rwanda and I work a lot on Rwanda, and the first time I went there, when I came back home, I had the feeling that this phenomenon was clear to me. I'm going to show you. So this is a timeline, okay, with the past, the present, the future. And talking to survivors all day long, as you do, Malgosia, had the feeling, I have no statistics to demonstrate what I'm saying, right? That was a feeling. That the importance of the past was something like that. The significance of the present during the discussions we had was something like that. And the rest of the energy could be devoted to the future, right? And I guess that for most practitioners working in conflict zone, post-conflict zones, the objective is to get to a society which is not backward-looking, but forward-looking. With, of course, the importance of the past is still significant. You're not going to erase that. But with society where the energy devoted to the present is something like that, and we hope that the future is something else than taking revenge for the father. So clearly, past and present all the time overlap after a war. This is important. Why? What does the notion of post-conflict mean? What does post mean? When is a war really over? What about the civil war in the US, right? We've been talking about that right now. And even in the case of World War I, as you know here, a century ago, the answer is not clear. Where is my... Yeah, so this may be a bit clearer than what I did. But here, so that was a painting on a wall in Los Angeles 2 years ago, and you see regarding the Armenian genocide, our wounds are still open, and I would say it's not only open wounds, it's festering wounds, right? So this is still active. And so the duration of the process raises several methodological questions for us. How can we assess the effects and after effects of a war? How can we measure the transformation of representations from a generation to another one? These are terrible challenges for us. How can we detect emotional and even unconscious processes? So to me, the conclusion is that we need to work with different disciplines. Social psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, historians, sociologists, philosophers, and so on. And we also need to develop platforms with practitioners like you. Second point, representations and the dichotomy enemy-friend. Enemy/friends, these boxes are not incompatible to me. Most scholars and practitioners I know use the same label of reconciliation after a war. However, I think that at least 4 scenarios could be taken into consideration. Post-traditional war, Franco-German case. The other, in terms of representation, is the enemy to fight. Fine. Post-civil war, Chile, Argentina, Colombia. The other is a traitor to punish. It's not really the same process. Post-colonial war, Franco-Algerian war. The other is a child to educate, a barbarian to civilize. It's not the same process neither. And post-genocide, where the other is an animal to exterminate. So we do use the same label, a bit like you did this morning for violence, memory. I would say, let us not over-generalize the use of reconciliation. All these representations do not have the same long-term effects on the affected populations. We have to think the processes differently. And once I was in Rwanda, I met a minister in charge of commemoration. He said, please, just before a talk, tell us about the Franco-German process, because if they did it, we can do it. And I was, this is hard to replicate what the Franco-German did. Okay, it's possible. They did it something. That was the vision of my grandfather, to be honest. This is pretty much my vision. My boyfriend, when I was 16 years old, was a German. I mean, it would have been impossible. My grandfather passed away. I passed away, so no problem, not a big. But so you see, it's possible. Changes of representation happen. However, the processes are not the same. I just give you a small example, then I will quickly go to my also just can go until this point. It happens. But I recently made a kind of deep comparison between the Franco-German case and the Franco-Algerian case to understand why a treaty of friendship has been possible between France and Germany in 1963, and why the same notion of treaty of friendship has never been signed between France and Algeria, even 4 or 5 decades after the end of the war. And I examined the negotiation process. The document that is available for those who are interested in this kind of thing. So I tried to analyze very technically the end phase of the negotiation processes, because they tried between France and Algeria. And it's really interesting. Technically speaking, the processes were smooth in both cases, and everything was clearly done after 6 months between France and Algeria. The document was ready for signature. Why didn't they sign anything? I think that because of the nature of violence. The Franco-German case was characterized by a paradoxical mixture of hatred and cultural admiration, a kind of symmetry, right? You don't find this symmetry in the Franco-Algerian case, not at all. You don't have this fascination towards the other culture. You have a kind of scorn and feeling of humiliation. There is no reciprocal admiration. So the processes cannot be the same. I can't go into details, but I'll be happy to elaborate if you are interested in. And so now the third point. So for timing, then representation, and what about emotions and this distinction between positive and negative emotions? 2 brief points. First, about the importance of emotions. Almost all recent research, analysis and so on, and practice demonstrate the importance of evoking experience. That was emphasized yesterday again, the last session. The experience of war in taking seriously emotional, embodied, and affective registers, right? I have a question, though, regarding the paradoxical impact of commemorations when they exclusively focus on emotions. And so an anecdote here, very briefly. I was in Flanders Fields Museum in Ypres. Some of you might know that. And this museum really focuses on emotions a lot. And I was visiting that with a friend, Laurence van Ypersee, a brilliant historian in Belgium of World War I. And she was furious after the visit, because she had the feeling that it was all about emotions, and so her word was, there is much to feel but nothing to reflect on here. The kids will not learn anything here in terms of political responsibility and so on, so I would like to know how you would react as practitioners. And my second point, which is more important, I think, regarding the so-called positive and negative emotions. In all textbooks in conflict resolution, so in my field, hatred is considered as a strictly negative emotion, right? This is what we need to avoid. Overcoming the burden of violence, overcoming hatred, right? I think that it might be appropriate to see it as neither positive nor negative, just as an emotion, right? The way it is. And I'm not going to call for hatred, right? Don't misinterpret me, but I'm not going to attempt to crush it by all means. Anecdote in Rwanda, a Rwandan survivor who was particularly involved in local reconciliation. So she was going to jail every 2 other days to give food to the perpetrators of her family. And she was left alone. I mean, her life, she was completely scared, an awful scenario. And I was puzzled, how do you find the energy to do that? And she said, I took the time for hatred. It took me 10 years. I hated the entire world, and now I can think about reconciliation. I don't mean that this is a standard that should be followed by everybody. I also remember another voice, same village, same kind of scenario, and she said, Valerie, I already live with them. And she meant the other community. She was a minority in this community of perpetrators, among others. I already live with them. Don't ask me more. Don't ask me too much. Right? So negative emotions. Conclusion. I have a general question for us regarding the appropriateness of our posture, of our job, of our practice as museum practitioner and so on. What is the legitimacy of scholars, for instance, in our field? How much credibility do we have? What can we say about dealing with mass atrocities if we are not survivors? Who am I to say what people should do in Rwanda or in the Balkans? What can we say about the war experience if we are not veterans? So, brief anecdote, which was so important for me, and that's the last sentence. I was in Rwanda again with a PhD student, Rwandan, one of my PhD students, working with me. And we were not in downtown, we were in a small alley, in a small street. He wanted to show me his house and so on, so it was a kind of periphery of Kigali. And there we met, we were together, the two of us, and one lady, quite old, she looked at me with a kind of hatred in her eyes that I didn't know. I'm not used to that, frankly speaking. And she said something in Kinyarwanda. Of course, I didn't get anything. And I said to Ajay, what did she say right now? Oh, nothing, it's not important. I said, please, tell me what she said. No, that's not important. And then power, asymmetry. You are my PhD student. Tell me what she said, right? And he said, right, well, she just said, go back home, it's too late. I was devastated. She understood that I was Western, probably Belgian, and you can imagine Belgium did a lot in Rwanda, and not really for always good reasons. And so she disappeared, but her voice is still with me. Not because I feel guilty, but just because her voice, her message was important. What is my legitimacy here? And it forces me to reflect on my intentions, my hopes. Are we working on this for them or for us? Do we need a redemption for us or for them? I don't know, it's a question. So I prefer to adopt a low profile in order to avoid that kind of scenario, Tintin in the Congo. We've done enough, right? And I would insist on the importance of being realistic in terms of timing, in terms also of aims. Coexistence is already a remarkable goal after mass atrocities. And I will let you with one sentence by a Colombian woman who tragically told me once, so we are far away from Europe, but I think that it tells a lot about Europe. Don't touch about my hatred. This is the only thing that's left. They took all I had except for my hatred. So I think that there's nothing to add. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Professor Valerie. Please, maybe it will be more comfortable for linking past and present, and to opening the non-European perspective and something which also is rooted in the European terms of violence and vice versa. Really to give us some kind of wider frame to understand the processes, which are not only historical processes, but also there are sociological, psychological processes. And we need this wider perspective. And I would like now to invite maybe Professor Jordi, but just a second. I just have to make this comment. How important is for us to link the past and the future, but also for the local communities in Rwanda. Genocide in Rwanda. This is from the Rwandan government, but it's written not via letter G. It's written via letter J, like Jewish people. And this is a special kind of the word they created in 2012. They need representation. They need strong representation so much. They decided to make a reference to the Holocaust, but himself, and to create a word like Shoah, and create their own word, genocide, written by letter G, like Jewish people. So this is also, showing us how these responsibilities are going in both ways. They ask us, and we also should be responsible. So thank you very much. And please, Professor Jordi, now we are going back to case studies. From the more theoretical perspective to case studies, we'll have a Spain case studies.
Hello. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Rafał Roguski, to invite me. And we are going to move very quick because I have a lot of photos and presentations about the Spanish, so-called Spanish case. And we are going to put on the table many, many things that we've been talking about, maybe for the debate also about the monument of the Holocaust, about the bronze, but the golden soldier that I want to talk about that. But we are going to go deep to our case in our country, in the south of Europe, western south. And well, we are also an European network, not only European, because we have partners abroad and in Latin America or any other countries, and we are trying to work in 2 dimensions and different scales and dimensions about politics of memory, observing, dealing with academics, and also the local, global and national politics of memory, but we are kind of acting, or we are, maybe sometimes we are not even scholars, we are an activist sometimes. And well, this is our, more or less our network, a lot of partners that you are here, and we are doing a lot of activities. First, it's about history too. So talking about Spain. Violence in Spain, I mean the huge trauma of our society, it was the Spanish Civil War from 36 to 39. Here is a special map, but I brought this map because, you know, at the beginning of July 1936, 80 years ago already, so it's not so close and so recent as other violence and inside society civil wars. But this map, I think it's important because we are going to talk about this kind of violence. You can see the islands, the north of Africa colonies, and then some parts of capitals of Andalusia and the center north. And this blue on the 36 is important because there was, and we are beginning to talk about that from the point of view of history, there was no war there. There was no war. So we are talking and we are writing, we are making a lot of films about the Spanish Civil War, but there was no war there. There was a straight repression and violence. And it has to be all the, I mean, all the evolution of the war has to be with this kind and this balance, non-balanced and no reconciliation nowadays also about the criterion or about the kind of common history or about the kind of common lecture about the past between the Republican zone and governmental zone and the militaries who began the coup d'etat and the putsch in Spain, of course. Well, we will talk about that. There is a kind of also new works about the victims and these victims of violence. And you can see also this violence in the Republican side by the revolution, the anarchists and communists, and etc. And then there is some missed people here. Because we have this violence nowadays from the university. Nowadays we are going to the politics of memory that I have to say that we have a lack of the state, Spanish state have a lot of memory. It's more or less, I'm sorry, but my lack of English too, but I will try to explain to you. So, and this is the map of the violence in Spain. This is the more recent mass grave map on the Spanish case of violence and disappear people. So that amount of repression from both sides, you have to count the killings of Franco in a mass grave after 39, so official and repression of a state. But you have to add this 100,000, more than 100,000 still disappear people on a mass grave, on irregular burials, etc., etc., etc. So this is our, let's say, main problem nowadays about politics and memory in Spain. And I would say not only in Spain, because it's international nowadays, that people were resistance, they were shot, they were fusillés, and so nowadays they are disappeared. This international networking, transnational justice, memory concepts, that they are evolution, and I think that sometimes civil society and academics, we are happy that sometimes these concepts are evolution in the broader atmosphere and broader interaction in an international atmosphere. Well, this is the situation about violence. Another kind of violence, it was 500,000 of people had to leave Spain, so exile has a violence too. People had to go out, of course, inmates in the French concentration camps, refugee camps, well, some images that you know from the Spanish Civil War diaspora until nowadays, with some, this around the world diaspora of the Spanish people. So this is another kind of violence that we still have in our societies, of course. And more or less, this kind of Spanish labyrinth. What about reconciliation? The reconciliation was a kind of pact after the Franco's death. We have 2 years, Franco death in 75, so we have two years of a kind of a transitional dictator still period until 77. And in 77 we have a kind of amnesty law. And this amnesty law in our case is very important because nowadays the people who were on the street asking for this kind of amnesty, liberty and democracy, now they are saying, okay, we were wrong. Because the amnesty on the 77, there were of course students in the jail, there was repression and punishment, and these 2 years there were still 300 people killed by the police and repression of the state, but they were little people. The former prisoners who were 30 years in the jails, who the relative of the killings, etc., they were already not in jails, not punished, and the reconciliation and this law of amnesty, we realized that on the fact they amnesty the regime of Franco. So we had this transitional period, and regarding memory, we have a continuity and a pact, you know, about monarchy. I'm not going to get in, but this is very important because this is the turning point nowadays. And we are not talking anymore about reconciliation because we say, and we thought that the reconciliation is democracy. We need democracy, democracy, and democracy, and the parliament is the agora where everybody and all the Democrats are reconciliation with our past, with our ideas, and with our co-citizens. So there was this period, a small period of memory, and then the state decided during 30 years, more or less, so-called this pact of silence. Let's not talk about the Spanish Civil War, let's not talk about the past. And of course, this long dictator for 4 years, like Franquism. Of course, there was not dignification of the victims, there was not reparation until the end of the 90s and the beginning of, I'm calling this the decade of memory. And it's only a decade because you know that we were at the end of this politics of memory all over Europe and the world, but there was a kind of a breakdown and there was a kind of fake because the political changes, of course, memory it's political too. But this decade we had a lot of things. First of all, there was this, the first contemporary excavations, like professionals by associations of the beginning of these mass graves. We don't have to forget that we had excavations before, and then we don't have to forget that we had a lot of books about repression before this decade, from 2000 and 2010, something like that. But we have this kind of eclosion of memory, sometimes hypertrophy of memory. We were working there, you will see some pictures, I'm going to run. But suddenly, 2010, 2011, there was this lack, there is no state. You have here, more or less, our president say, okay, my political memory is 0. And there will be 0, 0, 0. Now we have 5 zeros. And this explains a lot of things. So nowadays, I think that the politics of memory are in networks like ours, again to academics, again to the civil society organizations, and again to some city councils, and again some regions that they are giving and they are moving around this memory. I'm not sure about, I was involved in the first memory law in Spain in 2007 and 2007 in Catalonia too. We had this first law from the first time on the democracy. Now there is a kind of a reproduction of laws. I'm not sure about memory by law. And we have a lot of cases in Basque Country, has an Institute of Memory. Here Irache, she is the director of a Peace Museum in Guernica. She has a lot to things to do, sorry. And then we have in Andalusia and different regions where the state has this lack, and above all, the regions that they didn't have fights, they didn't have this war, and they had straight family mass killings. We opened a mass grave, for example. It was a woman with 7 kids in a kind of, it was a myth, it was true, it was oral history, but we work after, first of all, research, and we found that maybe they should be there in the north of Spain, and we found the bodies, and this is mass killings. Maybe Annette Viborca told in a genocide course in Barcelona that also genocides are when someone is killing a family. This is a concept of genocide too. This is a big debate, of course, about genocides, but this is very, very emotional for our cases in Spain. And this is a big debate also because a rear guard of the Spanish Civil War, there is another kind of mass graves. And we don't want to mix, but okay. I'm moving on, but that laws, they have a lot of failures and frustration because you can approve of laws. This is a legislative power, but who is the executive who is developing these laws? Where is this money for these public policies of memory, and what are the main topics? For me, the main topics are more or less 4 things. This civil society activism excaving mass graves, that I think that it has to be done with the commissions in between anthropology, forensics, university and associations and victims, but professional. And it's the responsibility of the state. It's not the responsibility of the civil society. There is one thing. Then, of course, the social movements pro-memory, the relatives of the victims, and the politics not only to put names of these disappeared people, but also to dignify the places. And we are working a lot with that, how to dignify this kind of mass grave, how to recognize with acknowledgement about the facts what was our past and what was our reality, or their reality. Another thing is a lack of democratization about public archives. This is more a critic from me as a researcher, because they are using sometimes, many times, even we have published books with this information, these names, this number of victims, these names of perpetrators, names there was important too, but they are reclosing using a Franquist law of 1962. So why now? Because it's a counter power of this political memory during this decade of memory. Well, this is another debate, but this lack of democracy. Archive and information have to be open, of course, military ones, police ones, repression ones. The other thing is about Franco Symbology on the streets, these monuments that we were talking about, this victory in Barcelona, so, okay, let's say this progressist Barcelona city open, etc., European one, but till 2011, we had this victory in the main street, Paseo de Gracia, with Diagonal Avenue, and we have still these contradictions. The monument in the Fallen in Pamplona, you know that there was 3 ideological militaries of the coup d'etat, Francisco Franco, General Mola, who was the main chef, and Sanjurjo. Mola and Sanjurjo, they were buried here, and only 2 months ago the bodies were taken out, and we have a project with the Navarra government, who for me is one of the best memory laws in Spain, in Navarra, a small community on the north with the French border, but this is a huge monument with all this iconography of the fascism, national Catholicism, and etc., and what to do there. We have a commission with artists and architects and many other people what they are going to do, because it's the city council and Navarra government. But what could they do? Interpretation center, memorial, this kind of authentic, original places, but let's say of terror or of dictatorship. This is a very big debate, and the biggest debate in Spain is this one. It's Franco Town, Valle de los Caídos. It's the biggest mass grave because they are soldiers from the Spanish Civil War, both sides, because in the 50s they removed a lot of bodies from the places of fight inside this very big mountain, converted in a mausoleum for the dictatorship, for the dictator himself. And there is Primo de Rivera, the founder of Falange, the fascist party in Spain, and the body of Franco. And this is the best, but it's our official memory because it's national heritage. You are and we are paying with our taxes, we are having a coffee, so with our taxes we are paying this monument, we are cleaning this monument, and this is more or less the place who Franco chose to create his kind of big mausoleum. Of course, this mausoleum was did by slaves, by workers and political prisoners, as you can see in these photos on your right, and himself was time by time regarding and going for the works and everything. It was the time also that Franco was accepted in the United Nations in the 50s. This is the internal repression, the internal violence still, but there is the international atmosphere, and who explains also the continuity of the regime until Franco's death in his bed in the hospital. So this is more or less some photos about the monument, and there is a very big debate. What had to do? Horst Kocheisel say we are going to explode. He wanted to explode the Brandenburg Tor. Has a project for I like this project. We can talk about that. But he's in the commission. He was in Pamplona last week about this other Caídos mausoleum. What to do with that? There is more than 50,000 people buried here, not the dictator and the Falange leader. So what to do? There is still, the narrative is still the narrative of the dictatorship, not the narrative from the democracy. So this is the past uses of the past. Some nostalgics, you have souvenirs, but you have this, this mausoleum like very clean and you can visit. There were some demonstrations from this kind of nostalgics still. And of course, there is this commemoration of everybody who died during the Civil War, forgotten for the land. No? There is no any commemoration for the other victims for Franco, but they are buried there also. And the relative has to have a special permission to go to the mass graves who are behind the crypt. I like this photo because it was forbidden, but there is this thing about souvenirs that we are working also in other cases, like in Italy, in Predapio, where Mussolini's war buried. Catalan case is more or less the same. We have this law to create a kind of memorial, and there was a kind of lack of the law too, but we still have big monuments like this one, of this very important battle in the Ebro battle during the Spanish Civil War in Tortosa. And they are demanding a lot of removing monuments of other things, like nationalism, for instance, now in Catalonia. But they are voting like, okay, let's keep this monument here. Yeah, I'm finishing very, very fast. We did a research about what memorial places has to be more or less arise in this kind of multiplicity of memories, not uniqueness, about Franco and Spanish Civil War, also exiles and refugees. This is Portbou. This is a very special memory place for us too, in the border with France. This is Walter Benjamin mass grave in Portbou. He died there in 1940. He was trying to pass across the Spain and save himself. And there is this interesting monument of Dannycaliban, from Dannycaliban, in this lovely place. I recommend you to visit. And we are working with the memory of these exiles, also escaping from the Nazis during the Second World War. These are small prisons on the Pyrenees with the list of people. So research, first acknowledgement, and then acting. And there is a lot of Jews who pass here, allied peoples, etc., etc. And this is the dignification of mass graves, signposting, like pedagogical tools in 4 languages. And all this work, it turns down because these political issues. So I'm denouncing again the state of this work did by historians, by architects, by artists, etc., about bunkers, about memory sites, about monuments. Just to finish, in Barcelona we have a lot of debates. We have this concept that maybe some of you, I'm talking a lot about this kind of project, the invisibility of the place, the invisibility of gender because they were women, political prisoners, and how to put in the public space in the middle of Barcelona this invisible memory on 3 or 4 different aspects about the invisibility. We have a project interesting with the women of the neighborhood, so participation memories. And then we have this new challenge in Barcelona. What to do, because yesterday was the last prisoner to be in this prison. Are we capable to create a kind of transnational European thing in Barcelona, in this very big heritage memorial place, repression, violence place, that this prison or not? And this is a challenge that we are working in a participative project, acting also in the public space, and etc. And just to be for the debate and to be very, provocative if you want, the last installation that they did in the city council about using the statue of the dictator without head. It was a dialogue in between the victory and the Franco himself, and of course a kind of shadow of the Second Republic. And it was a kind of a scandal exhibition, but sometimes the contemporary art and these performances acting with society and then explodes. And of course the debate was exploded about what to do of with the other symbols that I was talking about. Well, thank you very much. I was very fast and very chaotical, but I think that there is a perspective of
Thank you very much. Of course, I didn't want you to stop, especially I am very much interested in mass graves. But I mean, we have another case study from Bosnia. I just would like to thank you also, Professor Oleg, because you also made us a fantastic framework about the violence. And now I see a great link between the memory as a form of violence, and this is so obvious that you can just make a comparative study between violence and memory and trauma also, which is overused on many levels. So this is really great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now Dr. Nicola from Sarajevo.
Yes, good morning. Yes, so I'll talk about the Bosnia-Herzegovina, about the question of reconciliation policy in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but in order also more generally to raise questions about possibilities and limits of reconciliation policy. As time control is not one of my best strengths, so if after 10 minutes you can make a sign, and when I know that I have to finish in the next 5 minutes. So concerning Bosnia-Herzegovina, so if you followed the news about Bosnia-Herzegovina in the last weeks, probably everybody of you did, every day, so you may have seen end of April there was one information about one event where the leaders of different religious communities in Bosnia-Herzegovina met. So leaders of Muslim religious community, from the Catholic religious community, from the Orthodox religious community, and also from the Jewish community. And they decided to visit together sites of suffering from each of the communities. So they visited a site where Bosniak civilians had been killed, then they moved to a site where Serb civilians had been killed. So we talk about the war between 92 and 95. Yeah? And then they visited a site where Croat civilians had been killed, also during 92, 95. And then finally we also visited a site where Jews had been killed during the Second World War, in a concentration camp. So this was accompanied by a discourse about the importance of reconciliation and how this example of this going together, the leaders of the different religious communities, showing this will of reconciliation. So you didn't hear about it because it didn't make the big news. In Bosnia-Herzegovina it was a little bit in the news, but also not too much. It was very much linked also with the discourse of hope, as you mean. It was seen, of course, as a sign of hope. Religious leaders are doing together something, especially because it was really the first time that the religious leaders went together to different sites of suffering, honoring each time, giving prayers for different victims of the different communities. So it was linked with the discourse of hope and reconciliation. The problem, of course, is that this was a one-day event. Yeah? So, I mean, they met, they were together some hours, and then next day, in a certain way, business as usual. I mean, this brings us to the problem, of course, of certain reconciliation gestures, which are not embedded in a larger or consistent reconciliation policy. And this is what we have in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We have actually different reconciliation gestures from religious leaders, also from political leaders, which we found in the last 20 years, 22 years since the end of the war. But they are really, in this sense, symbolic events, in the sense that they are not linked to a more general, consistent policy of reconciliation. You have not only gestures, you have also reconciliation efforts, which are going beyond one day, but they are mostly limited to civil society actors who are acting in a micro world. So you have different, very interesting micro reconciliation initiatives, but which don't go beyond a certain scope, on a local level or other levels. You have also reconciliation discourses, so people who talk about reconciliation, NGOs or civil society actors are partially doing it, and also the international community, talking about the need of reconciliation, and you have also a sort of reconciliation pressure from international community, a sort of moral pressure. You should reconcile, or as it was already said also a little bit with the example of what Valérie quoted, sort of, we reconciled in Western Europe, so why can't you do it here? Yeah? So this sort of moral, more or less subtle pressure exercised there. So yeah, we have reconciliation gestures, we have reconciliation efforts, we have reconciliation discourses, we have reconciliation pressures, but we have no reconciliation policy. Yeah? So basically, what is certainly the main problem if we talk about the question of reconciliation in Bosnia and Herzegovina is the absence of a consistent reconciliation policy on the political level. So, and this brings us, of course, to the question, why is that so? And also different observers who would agree, yeah, there is no reconciliation policy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and despite different efforts which have been done. And so one question, if we see why it is so complicated also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we certainly have to go back to the question how the war ended in 1995. And what the decision, how the war was ended, influences the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina until today. And to understand a little bit what happened in 1995, I think it's important to come back to this because it's, even if it's often mentioned by those who are dealing with Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think it's important to emphasize that. Actually, to understand what happened, I will make now a little historical experiment, or will try to use your historical imagination. So let's go to Spain in the 1930s. We just had a little bit the Spanish Civil War. So let's go to Spain in 1939. The Spanish Civil War is ongoing. It's still more or less 50-50% of the territory, so it's more October 37, but once again, it's imagination. Let's say in 1939, the nationalists are holding 50% of the territory, the Republicans are holding 50% of the territory. Within the Republican camp, there are also fights between the Republicans and the anarchists. But in this situation, actually, at one moment, the international community decides, okay, now let's bring the different war parties together. And so the big powers decide to impose some peace negotiations. So finally, there are negotiations taking place. So with the leaders of the nationalists, with the leaders of the Republicans, with the leaders of the anarchists, and they have to find an agreement how to, for the future of Spain. And with the pressure of the international community, finally a solution is found. So Spain is staying together, but 50% is going to the nationalists and 50% is going to the territory is going to the Republicans. And within this territory, also one part is going to the anarchists. And so now, so this is Spain, how it looks like now. That's the new Spain. In the same time, so there are three presidents, one nationalist president, one Republican president, and one anarchist president. And so they have to work together. And the best is, of course, also they should reconcile, yes? So in the same time, the political elites are still the same. So those who are in power are the same who led the war. Yeah, there will be some trials, but nevertheless, the ideologies, the parties continue to be in power and be the same. So that sounds a little bit surrealistic, and everybody would say, that would have happened in Spain in 1939. We are not sure how this would have worked out. But basically, we really have a similar situation in 1995 in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Basically, where the war did not end with a military victory of one side or the other, but with a compromise, which was imposed by outside, where the different groups finally found an agreement. So basically, where Bosnia and Herzegovina was kept as one state, but internally divided between, on the one hand, the Republika Srpska, and on the other hand, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina with 10 cantons, several cantons so-called Muslim Bosniak cantons, and other so-called Croat cantons with the majority. So the problem is we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina was created a situation where basically those who had led the war against each other had to continue to work with each other and to coexist in the same space, and on this basis also to continue their policies. The problem is you can see that these are not probably best preconditions to lead a policy of reconciliation. especially because, once again, in a certain way, the same political elites which were leading the war were continuing also after the war to be in power. And of course, also using the same rhetorics and using, having still similar aims as they had before the war. So what I wanted to say is actually the fact that there was no clear winner-loser situation, but the fact that the war ended with a compromise, which was in that sense a good thing because it ended the war and so spared a lot of lives which would have been lost if the war would have continued, but in the same time created a situation where it makes it very difficult to make a consistent reconciliation policy. Let's take it another way around. If we compare it with other situations where there have been clear winner-loser situations, we can see also in a certain way to what extent this helped in developing a reconciliation policy. Let's take Rwanda. Let's take Rwanda in the fact, so there was a clear victory of the Rwandan Patriotic Front in 1995, which then went to power, is in power since 25 years, and since then in a certain way could develop and impose its reconciliation policy. I'm not telling now how good or bad it is, this reconciliation policy, I just say, as they have the power, they could impose in a certain way their reconciliation policy. We have a clear winner-loser situation, for example, also between France and Germany in 1945, where after a certain time, basically the two countries agree on a reconciliation policy, based also on the fact, of course, that there have been some changes. I mean, we imagine difficultly de Gaulle, or Robert Schuman in 1950, or de Gaulle in 1963, give the hand to a German chancellor if still the NSDAP would still have been in power. I mean, it still sounds stupid, but that's, of course, the fact that there was a regime change made in that fact also a reconciliation policy possible, and the fact that the Western German government distanciated itself from what happened made it also possible. So actually we have in Bosnia-Herzegovina this situation. So I don't say that a clear winner-loser situation is a precondition in any way for reconciliation policy. I think there are also other factors, but I say it makes it difficult. And to finish, I would say one problem when we talk about Bosnia-Herzegovina, it was already said here a little bit, so we are still in the discourses of the 90s and saying, so everybody is emphasizing only the victims of its own community and not acknowledging what's going on there. The problem is when you talk with people in Bosnia-Herzegovina about the possibilities of reconciliation, especially with victims, they will say, that is not my priority. So priority in a certain way is first to, well, some people would say to end the war in a certain way, which ended militarily but not psychologically. And what many victims will say, for me, the most important thing is that the other side recognizes what happened, what they did. Yeah? So the recognition before reconciliation. And as there is no recognition of what happened, many people say there cannot be a reconciliation before recognition. First, there have been a certain recognition of what happened, and then perhaps we can talk about reconciliation, but not the other way around. So this is some remarks about the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina, but I think they raise also more general questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Romo. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think somehow we success to fulfill the teaser that giving name is really important, yes, and it's before the reconciliation and before overcoming, and the giving name is necessary to reconcile and to overcome. But what is very interesting, I have a feeling that we have two completely different cases here. Here there is a big need to confrontate and give a name, and it means reconciliation, or it would mean reconciliation, and here we have a case that there is no need of giving a name. Let's say giving a name is also to confront, and I would like to open this question also for public and to make a Q&A discussion. Giving a name means also to confront with a material heritage, with the objects, with the evidence of the crime. In a Spanish case, we have there is a need to do something, but I'm thinking, for example, about the Srebrenica, and it doesn't help in the reconciliation at all, to having this very vivid example of the human remains, of the material evidence of the past, material representation, the real representation of death. And do you think it's helping or not? This kind of confrontation.
I'm not sure about the question of course, you can say too much memory or too much pointing the finger in the wounds is not helping. But I'm not sure also if this is the relevant question. Because, once again, I mean, it's... if I talk with some persons in Bosnia-Herzegovina, it's not a problem of naming. Everybody is naming everything. I mean, the crimes are named all over the place. But what is there is obviously a total absence of will, political will, to go beyond some barriers or something else. I give a very concrete example. Actually, before this initiative of the religious leaders to meet, there have been an initiative to make the same gestures with the 3 presidents in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So the Bosniak, the Serb, and the Croat president should visit 3 different sides of suffering from each side. It was an initiative by the Serb president who said that, and actually the one who refused this initiative was the Bosniak president, with the following reasoning, and which is interesting because it brings us also to this question of symmetry and asymmetry. He says, if I accept this, it puts us all on the same level. It means that we have all been victims in the same way and all been criminals in the same way. And this is what's something which many in the Bosniak community categorically refuse, even more because it's an obvious part of the Serb nationalist strategy to equalize all the victims. Yeah? It's a part of the discourse of nationalist Serb parties in Bosnia-Herzegovina to say, we had all victims, everybody was guilty, and everything was a big mess in a certain way. Yeah? And so, in a certain way, so it is this question, yeah, should we go to visit together? Does this relativize, in a certain way, the crimes which happened? Yeah? Does it equalize everything? So this is one of the big problems which we find here in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but I think it raises also the more general question about the question of the recognition of crimes, or the equalization of crimes and of suffering.
Professor Vareli would like to give a comment, and then I'm going Q&A, just 1-2 question, and from audience, it would be very good.
Just an echo to what you just said regarding Rwanda. It was so striking to see that in Rwanda a couple of NGOs were working on trauma. I know that this is your
definitely, and making money on it.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's interesting, the argument. The argument is the victims are traumatized. Sure. The perpetrators are traumatized. Well, the descendants of the victims are traumatized. Okay? Yes. Descendants of perpetrators are traumatized, the people coming from exile are traumatized, so everybody is traumatized, so the objective is healing. Not reconciliation, not justice, not everything. It's healing process. Well, it depends who says that.
Yes.
If it's a former, if it's a perpetrator who hadn't been punished, who says the objective of the society now is healing, it's just unbearable. So who says that is healing? So if it's an alibi not to go for what in terms of justice, I think it's just unbearable. Second comment, if I may.
Yes, of course.
You mentioned the lack of political willingness, which is also striking, and very often we compare Bosnia with Franco-German case, which was so miraculous, and it's remarkable. But what did happen? Leadership was key in the Franco-German case. However, it was not all about leadership and also a kind of social infrastructure. So calls from reconciliation came from above, from below as well, which is not the case in Bosnia, but also from outside. Why? It's not because people were exceptionally altruistic or generous. Maybe they were, but it's not that. I think
there were political force behind you.
Yeah, but why? Because they had a common new enemy. So for the first time, the enemy was not the other one on the other side of the Rhine, it was USSR. So if you have a new common enemy, I mean, it helps people to get really closer and closer. And so the call for reconciliation was coming from outside as well, with the US massive help with the Marshall Plan. And that was decisive as well. I don't want to be too long.
I mean, we have more time, so this is great. And I mean, just talking about trauma, whole your lecture I was thinking about if trauma is going under moral categorization, violence, yes, memory, yes, or we should be very careful with these discourses, not to make equal and not too much equal. But then I was thinking about trauma, which is a category also connected with body and not with morale and not with ethnicity so much, yes? And this is what you told, that we have to, even though I think trauma is not moral, it should not be moral determinate, but we have to be very careful anyhow, because definitely it's overused also as a discourse which could be a power, yes, a discourse of power. Would you like to make any comment about the question? Okay, so I'm opening a Q&A then. Okay, you will, yes, okay. I can give you mine if you want. It's working? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Markus Meckel from Germany. I'm chairman of the advisory board, and for some years I was president of the German War Grave Commission, and I come back to that my experience. I think it is important that we see the war graves all over Europe, and in which way we deal with that. We have a long tradition of every nation to deal with them as heroes of the nation. And my question is, in which way we think we can do it in the future, because we as Germans, for instance, we are not able to call the war graves, the people who are lying there, the soldiers, to call them heroes, and we don't do it. But my experience, for instance, in talks with the French organization was that they said, that's very interesting for us. We have similar experiences in different times. We have difficulties to deal with that soldiers in Algeria or in Vietnam. And the question is how to deal with own responsibility and being guilty. And I think this could be a very interesting question, not only for a nation, but also for instance, the European dialogue. I think from that approach, it could be interesting experiences to see which you, for instance, have in Balkan or in Bosnian. That's why I think a European approach for all that could be very interesting, and we should improve it.
You would like to?
Thank you very much. I completely agree. I mean, this is the most arduous task, to recognize the guilty of ourselves as a community. And it's one of the main issues, I should say, not only in our cases, but around these public policies of memory that's happening. About colonial memory, what is the narrative? We have this project in Montluc prison in Lyon, no traces, National Heritage Memorial Prison, about the Second World War, but no traces of Algerian War. And there were a guillotine inside the prison, and the heads were cut of people. These uncomfortable memories, I'm calling this. And this, one of the most uncomfortable memories is recognize the guilty. And of course, Germans, you are, I mean, the leaders on that. And I've listened in many networks and seminars that from other different scholars or countries or practitioners, let's say, that, well, okay, Germans, you are going too far too. You have to be a little proud about that. And this is one example, just to finish. This is a German-Russian museum outside Berlin with a new exhibition. It's everything about documentation of the Second World War and the guilty of Germans. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, where there was signed this 8 May, yeah, this one, and the director said to us that we have a workshop there, and they said it's becoming quite uncomfortable this nowadays, because also Germans, you are, you know, young people, you have the flag now, it was a symbol, something hidden, no, there is a football thing there inside. But the responsibility in other cases, in the Spanish case, for instance, it has to do a lot with this, with the thing of not reconciliation but recognition. And this is very important. And the names, we have a lot of projects, the names and the voices. And the voices, a lot of projects. This is about recognition first, and then we will see, and we will debate.
I'm Hartmut Topp from Berlin, from Germany, and at least I'd like to tell you about an example which is very important. In Berlin, we have many people who are refugees from the war of Yugoslavia, from Bosnia. And there are many women, and I think there's an initiative since about more than 10 years. You probably all know the famous tapis de Bayeux, and somebody had an idea to make something else. They have no graves. So many of the women started to embroider handkerchiefs with the names and some memories of the people who disappeared and put it all together. It's very long now, it's thousands of handkerchiefs already, and giving those people the chance first to heal themselves is such an important step, and to offer them a chance to tell their stories to other people who listen. So allowing them to grieve and grievance, to accept this, it's not a question of guilt and responsibility in the first place, it's just preparing a readiness to listen to the other and then perhaps take the next step. And I think that's a very good initiative and a possibility to materialize memories of persons who have disappeared, to still give them a name, like we have in the Shoah cases, of course, the idea to return the names to those who disappeared. In that case, it's a very small step, but I think it's a good initiative.
Please.
Well, actually, I have just one question. What comes first? Reconciliation is a political process or is a societal process?
This is a question to all of participants. We can? Yes. Okay. Great. There is okay. So let's collect, and then we'll have another question. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. My question is similar. Is there in Bosnia social willingness for reconciliation? Because of course politicians are playing society, and what you said about politicians not willing to visit those sites and mass graves is one. And secondly, is there social willingness, or people in Bosnia are already tired with this topic, or maybe just are played with the politicians?
I would suggest that maybe you will start and you will answer to these two questions, and then we'll go back to these questions for everybody. Yeah. No, let's start from Nicola, then he will respond to this also Bosnian case, and then we'll go back to the first question.
There's a tendency in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but I think in many other countries, to put in opposition the bad politicians and the good citizens, the good people, which is of course a little bit very simplifying, because you have of course you can find also a social unwillingness to reconcile in a certain way. But once again, here it's about what are we talking about? Reconciliation as a form of we have to move towards each other, to tell us the story, to forgive each other or whatever, or is it the minimalistic conception of just coexisting? Yeah, and of course you have many forms of coexistence in Bosnia-Herzegovina which work more or less well. It is actually quite surprising or astonishing to see that Bosnia-Herzegovina has neither experienced the Lebanese evolution or a Northern Ireland evolution of outbursts of violence, etc., etc. So it seems to see that the coexistence works pretty well in a general way. Now, if you go in different villages, of course, it doesn't say anything about how traumatizing it still is, of course, for one person to see the murderer of the family or some other criminal walking around. Yeah. But so there are different. What does it mean? People are tired. people, I mean, whatever. Some people are tired of some reconciliation discourses because they have been over and over stretched since 95, especially also by the international community, but not only. There have been many local actors who are using it and who are still using it. And there are still very, very interesting efforts going on. One organization since 20 years, the Center for Nonviolent Action, which is bringing together soldiers from the different armies, which are visiting also different sites together, etc. So there are, but that's what I say, there are reconciliation efforts in a micro, on a micro level, yeah, but which are super interesting, which they don't change the general climate, but nevertheless they are useful, I think, because they change already little things in a microclimate, and I would not neglect the importance of microclimates and micro worlds. And perhaps just to go to the next general question, which was about what comes first, the political or the social. Let's take 100 cases and probably we will have 100 different answers. I mean, it's true when we look at the Franco-German cases, the first who talked about reconciliation or bringing people together was civil society people, where before politicians started to do it. But then I think it's really in the combination of both, if we see what are factors of success, if reconciliation policies succeed, if there is a combination of bottom-up initiatives and top-down initiatives. That's not a very original answer, but...
Thank you. I think that the Bosnian case raises a super important question for scholars, but also for practitioners like you, and also museum conceptors and so on. What do we do if reconciliation is not on the agenda? Let's be a little bit more creative and not only a kind of, binary vision with war, violence, peace, reconciliation. Let's go beyond that. There are plenty of possibilities, as you said. So what if it's not on the agenda? And what comes first? I think that leadership is key. Even though we have to be context specific and see case specifically, however, a comparative analysis shows that it really depends on leadership. And so South Africa, for instance, I think as soon as he got power, Mandela, I mean, he was talking in terms of reconciliation, and there was people on the other side of the table, and also among the society, able to think in terms of reconciliation. Is it a miracle? Not at all. So really, leadership is key.
So not economy, but leadership. Not strong economical input, but...
That's another variable, but I think the leadership is key to know whether it comes first or not. And maybe the third point, if I may use that, I don't know whether it helps, but it helps me. It's a security blanket. So Nicola mentioned, Nicola, you mentioned minimalistic and maximalistic views. So that's okay. I don't need it. So if we take a spectrum with all the possibilities of conceptions of reconciliation, this is important because otherwise you have misunderstanding between people, policymakers, NGOs, donors, and so on. And so if we have a minimalist view of reconciliation, reconciliation means conflict management. I mean, you stop killing the other one, you still hate, we are still full of hatred, but you at least, so conflict management. Here, maximalist view, Desmond Tutu and so on, reconciliation means a transcendent process, right? And here, why is it important? And we are somewhere on the spectrum in terms of conception. Why is it important? At least two levels. First, about the objective of an NGO, of a museum, of a textbook, whatever. From a minimalist perspective, the objective is coexistence, and you mentioned that. From maximalist view, what is the objective? Harmony, brotherhood. If you want, maybe. You are probably more here than there. And an intermediary vision could be that that harmony is too much, too ambitious, coexistence is too explosive, and so we try to reach respect for fellow citizens that we still dislike very much. I think it's pretty good as well. And second level, why is it important in terms of objective? Because it has concrete impact for the population affected. if you target coexistence, it means that you respect the memories of each group. Okay, so you have your memory. Okay, this is a hero for you, this is a traitor for you, a criminal, okay, but we don't deal with that. You coexist. Okay? Here, with harmony, you try to favor a complete transformation of the meaning given to the past. And it's possible, but it's much more ambitious. So you ask the population to overcome the meaning they have in mind and to share a common vision. Is it the objective of the House of Memory here to favor a common vision of the past, even though we know that we will keep divergences and so on? But so I think that this is really key to know where we are in our objectives.
And for closing remark, I would like Professor Giorgi. I mean, closing remark for this question, but in general, it will be, let's say, closing remark.
Very short to Anna. Well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that political reconciliation is, in the media times, it's about the photo and press declaration. And social reconciliation, it's about recognition and memory process, long memory process of social interaction inside a democracy system, an agora. This is my opinion. You cannot, Spanish government took like a kind of image of reconciliation in 2007, 2008, after the memory law. A soldier who fought with Hitler, División Azul, these volunteers for Franco who fought with Hitler in the East Front. There were volunteers fighting as Wehrmacht groups, División Azul, on the military march beside, hand by hand, to a Republican resistance who were liberating France against Nazis. It doesn't work. It was the photo, it was the image. We are using the image for conferences, for PhD works, but it doesn't work. This is a social process of more and democracy and democracy and democracy. Sorry.
I would like to thank you so much for your engagement. We were working on this panel a bit wider before. We were meeting on Skype. Thank you very much. Thanks to forum like that you are creating, thanks to European Network, I had a great privilege to discover your stories and your intellectual paths, and it was a great adventure. Thank you very much. Thank you for the participation. Merci.